There was a season in my life when I became so consumed with being seen by one person that I nearly lost sight of who I actually was. I am not proud of what I am about to tell you, but I believe with everything in me that if I carry this story alone, it only does half the work it was meant to do. So, I am going to tell you all of it. The good parts, the ugly parts, and the parts that still make me close my eyes and breathe slowly when I think back on them. I grew up in a plain community where life moved quietly and with purpose. We rose before the sun, worked until our hands ached, prayed together, ate together, and measured a good day by whether we had been faithful and useful to those around us. My mother taught me early that humility was not weakness. She said it was the strongest thing a woman could carry, and I believed her. I wanted to be the kind of woman who made her family proud, who served her community without complaint, who lived in a way that reflected something worthy. I was not perfect, but I tried. I genuinely tried. And for most of my young life, that trying felt like enough. Then I began to understand what it meant when Bishop Amos spoke your name with approval. Bishop Amos was not just a man with a title. He was the kind of person whose presence changed the temperature of a room. When he listened, he actually listened. When he offered guidance, you felt it settle into you like warmth. He had led our community through grief and disagreement and uncertainty, and he had done it with a steadiness that I deeply respected. His approval was not something people chased openly. That would have been seen as prideful. But everyone knew, in the quiet, unspoken way that communities know things, that being recognized by Bishop Amos meant something. It meant you were trustworthy. It meant you were growing. It meant you mattered in a way that went beyond your own household. I never wanted anything inappropriate. I want you to understand that clearly. This was never about romance or something selfish and shallow. What I wanted was to be seen as capable, as faithful, as someone whose contributions were real and meaningful. I wanted to earn his respect the way I had watched others earn it. And for a long time, I quietly worked toward that without even realizing the feeling had a name. Her name was Miriam. She came from a family 3 settlements over and had joined our community through her marriage connection before I even had a chance to know her well. From the very first gathering, she moved through the room like someone who had always belonged there. She laughed easily. She helped without being asked. She remembered everyone's names and the names of their children and the names of their children's troubles. I liked her immediately. There was nothing false about her warmth, and I saw that clearly. I told myself I was glad she had joined us, but then I started noticing things. Small things at first. The way Bishop Amos would mention her name when commending a well-organized food preparation. The way the older women would nod toward her when discussing who might help lead the younger girls through a difficult lesson. The way she always seemed to be exactly where the need was, and the way that was always, always noticed. And somewhere inside me, something shifted. It was barely a whisper at first, just a small, quiet wondering. Why her and not me? I had been here longer. I had given more years of service to this community. I had poured myself into exactly the kinds of things that Miriam was now being praised for. That whisper did not stay small. I started working harder. Not because the work needed it, but because I needed something to show for myself. I volunteered for every responsibility I could find. I arrived earlier and stayed later. I made sure my contributions were visible, not in a boastful way, but in the way a person arranges things when they are quietly, desperately hoping to be seen. And sometimes it worked. Bishop Amos would offer a kind word. An elder woman would nod with appreciation, and I would feel that rush of relief, that brief moment of feeling like I was enough. But it never lasted. Because the next time Miriam's name came up with that particular warmth in someone's voice, the relief would dissolve, and I would be back where I started, measuring myself against her. I knew what envy was. I had read about it, prayed about it, heard it spoken against from the time I was small enough to sit still for a sermon. I knew it was a poison. I knew it turned inward and ate at the very things you were trying to protect. And yet knowing that did not stop the feeling from growing. I would sit with Miriam during community meals and genuinely enjoy the conversation. And then I would walk home and replay every moment, cataloging who had looked at her more, who had addressed her first, whose voice had carried more warmth when they spoke to her versus me. I was exhausted by it. And I could not tell anyone because the very act of confessing it out loud felt like proof of how far I had fallen from the woman I believed myself to be. The turning point came on an ordinary afternoon. I had worked for 2 weeks organizing a project for the community, something I had put real effort into, real thought, real time. When Bishop Amos spoke briefly about it at the end of a gathering, he thanked several people by name and then moved on. Miriam had contributed one afternoon of help, and her name was one of those mentioned alongside mine. And something in me snapped. Not loudly, not visibly, but I felt it break. I walked outside before anyone could see my face, and I stood in the cold air, and I cried in a way I had not cried in years. Not because of what he said or did not say, but because I finally heard in that moment of pain what I had been telling myself for months, that my worth was only real if it was acknowledged, that I did not actually believe I mattered unless someone confirmed it for me, and that the competition I had built up in my mind had nothing to do with Miriam at all. It had everything to do with me. I went to my grandmother that evening. She was the kind of woman who listened without flinching, who had seen enough of life to know that most suffering is really just misunderstood longing. I told her what I had been carrying, all of it. And when I finished, she did not lecture me. She simply asked me one question. She said, "Child, who were you before you needed anyone to notice you?" And I sat with that question for a long time, because the answer was someone I recognized but had been ignoring. Someone who quilted with precision, not for praise, but because the pattern felt like prayer. Someone who checked on the grieving widow down the road, not because Bishop Amos would hear about it, but because it was simply the right thing to do. Someone who had been enough before she ever started measuring herself against another person. I did not wake up healed the next morning. That is not how it works. But something had loosened. I stopped volunteering from that desperate, competitive place and started asking myself honestly whether I actually had something to offer. And when the answer was yes, I gave it fully. And when the answer was no, I stepped back and let Miriam or someone else carry the moment. And slowly, something unexpected happened. I started genuinely admiring her again, the way I had the very first day. I stopped seeing her as proof of my inadequacy and started seeing her as exactly what she was, a woman doing her best with the gifts she had been given, just like me. One afternoon, she and I were working side by side, and she turned to me and said she had always admired how quietly dependable I was. She said she had watched me for a long time and wished she carried herself with the same kind of steadiness, and I nearly wept right there, because I had spent months believing she had everything I lacked, and she had been watching me the entire time and thinking something similar. We had been two women so focused on what the other had that neither of us fully saw what she already carried. Bishop Amos never knew any of it. Not the rivalry, not the jealousy, not the late nights I spent measuring myself against a version of another person I had constructed in my own anxious mind. He just kept being exactly who he was, a steady and faithful leader trying to guide a community well. The competition had lived entirely inside me, and dismantling it had to happen inside me too. What I learned in that season is something I still carry. Comparison does not just steal your joy. It steals your identity. It makes you forget who you were before you started looking sideways. And the approval you spend yourself chasing will never feel like enough. Not because it is not real, but because no external voice can fill a space that belongs to your own sense of worth. Have you ever found yourself comparing your life to someone else's and losing sight of your own value? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to hear your story. And if this touched something real in you today, please share it with someone who needs the reminder that they are already enough, not because someone said so, but because they simply are.